Continuing education knows that at the end, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we take the time to really listen to their needs and we understand all the different options that are available across the campus for them.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
Welcome again to our presentation. My name is Alphonse Keasley, a CWA, Conference and World Affairs board member as well as program committee member. And for recording purposes, I need to make sure I say that this is April 9th, 2024 at 9 a.m. and this is panel 18049. This panel is entitled Banning Diversity, the War on DEI, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. This is a round table, unlike other presentations at CWA. This one is going to be a round table where the conversation is handled principally by all of us who are up here on the dais. And our goal is to evaluate the driving factors behind the movement of banning DEI in certain parts of the country, as well as in our US Senate, the House of Representatives, as well as our goal is to look at how the business, education, government, and nonprofit sectors are responding to. Oh, sorry, correction. Today is April 11th, not April 9th, for the recording purposes. Thank you very much there, Pam, and so forth. So what we're going to be doing is having a conversation, basically amongst ourselves, and then eventually it's going to be with all of you through your questions, which I'll tell you more about in a second. To get us started, as is the practice of the University of Colorado, I'd like to read the land acknowledgement. The University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of indigenous peoples in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native American nations. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado Boulder can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought on indigenous peoples, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with indigenous peoples in issues locally and globally. The campus will do this. We will do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, and faculty and their work, educating, conducting research, supporting student success, and integrating indigenous knowledge, consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support to recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. So, I say that with all meaning because I don't think that our campus, or at least my colleagues who are indigenous folk as well as other allies, do not want us to just do this as a performative aspect, but that we mean what this all says of what the university is dedicating itself to. So now, about the way that we'd like to have your involvement in this, I'd like to mention that we want to be sure that you get a chance to ask questions. And here's how we're going to handle the Q&A section. We'll reserve the end of the discussion for the Q&A session. We're using a note card system to receive questions from the audience. As at any time in the session, simply raise your hand to request a note card and pencil from one of the producers. I think we only have one producer. We have one producer who's standing in the back there. Please write legibly. If you are a student, please note that on your question card, When you finish, raise your hand to hand it to the producer who will bring it up to me, and I urge everyone to please make your questions brief and to the point. Now, let me introduce who will be a part of this round table today. Sitting next to me, we have Yvonne Vissing, who her bio is presented fully in the program or online, but for right now, I'm just going to mention one or two things about her. She's a professor of healthcare studies and founding director of the Center for Childhood and Youth Studies and Center for Human Rights at Salem State University. New Hampshire?
Yes, Massachusetts. Massachusetts.
In Massachusetts. All right. She is on the steering committee for Human Rights Educators USA and Association for the Advancement of Science Human Rights Council. Next to Yvonne is Wisdom O. Cole, who is the National Director of the NAACP Youth and College Division. In his time at the NAACP, Cole has worked on campaigns around the cancellation of student debt, removing police from schools, and increasing voting access for young Black people. And then sitting next to Wisdom, we have Leo Glaze, who's been a history teacher for 18, although I thought we changed that to 20.
No, it's close enough. It's somewhere around there.
Years, and is in his second year at Sierra Canyon School in Chatsworth, California. He is an independent equity and education consultant who helps teachers develop and enhance their courses of studies, assists school administrators in creating equitable policies and practices, and advises nonprofit organizations and corporations. So, to get us started with this round table, and again, this is going to be more of a round table, I'd like to ask each of our members up here, how is it that you think of DEI? What DEI, and who's involved? What groups are involved with this? And we'll just do it down the line for right now.
Hi. Thank you for asking and for inviting me to come today and speak on this important topic and to try to give voice to people whose voices are not often heard. I'm a human rights advocate and have studied DEI and looked at it with curiosity, because why is this so controversial? Because it's really part of human rights. There are the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There's the, which had its 75th anniversary. There's the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is having its 35th anniversary. And every country in the world has supported the child rights policy, except for one, and that's the US. And so I find it curious that we have moved to a point where we need to talk about DEI instead of human rights, because really I think that human rights is the broader umbrella for it. But because people have not honored what or understood what human rights are, because most people don't have a human rights education, they never had a class in it, they don't know what it is, and so what has happened is that the workforce is finding that their employees discriminate, that their policies are biased, and so there's this movement toward trying to create education on this issue of DEI. And so I think that it is an important topic to cover, whether we're talking about education, employment, healthcare, and it all starts in the early years of how we learn to respect one another.
Good morning, everybody. I said good morning, everybody. That's what I like to hear, get some energy in the room. I think the question was, who's involved in DEI? And when I think of that question, I think that everybody here in this room and everybody in existence is involved in DEI. What that means is that DEI is a framework, a structure that is helping to improve our thought processes, improve our structures, right? This is an opportunity to right the wrongs of the past, an opportunity to ensure that those who come from marginalized communities have access. You know, when we think about the current moment in time that we're in, you know, I just woke up this morning and got a call from our legal team that we are potentially dropping a lawsuit against the state of Arkansas because they are making African American studies or AP African American studies illegal in the state of Arkansas. You know, all across this nation, particularly this year, and I want to say this is nothing brand new, but we are seeing a targeted attack against DEI. And I think when we are talking about what is necessary when it comes to DEI and the structures to support it, that requires all of us. You know, oftentimes when we are talking about DEI, we look to the Black people in the room, or we look to the women in the room, or we look to the marginalized communities in the room. But DEI requires all of us putting in an investment to say, hey, we value diversity of thought in our university. We value diversity of practice in our business. We value diversity of experiences in our social groups, right? We have to make sure that we address the value proposition when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and how it is helping to strengthen all of us. I'm sure Leo can talk more about this, but there's research that shows that all students benefit from having Black teachers, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion is helping us grow and build this nation to be the nation that it deserves to be.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. I mean, having to follow up both of them makes it seem like a bit more of an echo chamber, but I mean, they are perfectly spot on. Like, when it comes to DEI, like, it should involve every single one of us. It is not about excluding anybody, it's about including everyone. And if you're in an institution or in a place or in a practice in which people feel like they are excluded, then unfortunately that means that it's probably not being done to the best of its ability. But DEI should improve the lives of everybody. Everybody in this room should be made a better person, a more whole person, a more complete person based off of the practices that are inclusive to everybody. I mean, the saying goes that like a low tide raises all boats, and really that is the essence of what DEI should do. So even people that have not been historically marginalized should benefit from having other people become more empowered, to have their ideas shared, because even for people that have been historically empowered to act on the behalf of others, DEI should be able to be a lens or framework in order to open up their minds, get them more inclusive to other people that are around them, get them open to more ideas instead of the ideas that they've kind of grown around with. I would like to think that all of us would like to be in an environment, be in a situation in which we get to learn from other people that have had different experiences from us. And if we do not want to be in those sorts of environments, then that is unfortunately a choice that you would be making for yourself. But I know working with kids for the past 20 years or so, every kid I would like to think has benefited from having the shared experiences of other people that have been around them. And it creates bridges, and it doesn't build walls and build barriers when it's done the way that it should. It is unfortunate that we have kind of taken the word DEI, the acronym, and we've turned it into a bad word. And it's not, because it should be one that comes from a place of scholarship, because it is a discipline. And it should come from a place of love and caring, and it should come from a place of actionable and action steps.
Thank you there, Leo. As you know, I have a list of questions up here, but I'm going to sort of pick up on some of the things that you all have said just to help create that spirit of the round table. Absolutely. Most people don't have a clue that the UN declared the Declaration of Human Rights back in 1948 and so forth. And it doesn't surprise me that all of us recognize that there's something, but what's missing? How did this whole idea miss so many people that they think it's something that should be targeted right now? It's sort of interesting to me to hear all of us, we've never met before until this morning, have this way of understanding what the real soul of DEI is about. By the way, I do DEIB and belonging, So what is it that you think has brought on this absence of understanding of wanting to have all peoples involved? Any thoughts just for us to just get it going?
Sure, I'll step in. I think that there's much more that binds us together that ever separates us. And we all want to belong. right? We want to belong to our communities, our school. We want to matter, and we want to have an opportunity to use our gifts and talents, because everybody has been gifted with an opportunity to be on this earth to do something that is unique and wonderful to make the world better. And so finding obstacles put forward is a real challenge. And I think as we've moved into the heterogeneity of society, we are not a homogeneous society. We're not a homogeneous world. And this is a worldwide issue. It's not something that is just in Boulder or in the US. It is a worldwide issue where people are moving, they're intermarrying, we are sharing different religions, different cultures, languages, and we are finding that we need to bond up together. But there's this issue of power differentials, right? And so people in power want to keep it, and the people who don't have it want a seat at the table. Right? And if you've never been left out, then maybe you don't understand what the issues are. But if you've been left out, then you know front and center what the issues are. And it doesn't matter if it's race or gender or sexual orientation or handicap or religion. And I think that the diversity of the world is really a major cause. What do you think?
Yeah, I think when I think about this question, I think about the quote by Malcolm X that says, "Education is our passport to tomorrow, to our future." You know, oftentimes when I think as an organizer, I think of a lot of this work through storytelling. When I was becoming a teacher in San Francisco, I worked at a school called June Jordan School for Equity. And a lot of the work that we were doing was working to integrate ethnic studies into the curriculum in San Francisco Unified School District, as well as California. A lot of this was modeled after some of the work happening in Arizona. And there's a phenomenal film about the work to integrate ethnic studies there in Arizona. But a lot of the contention that happened around the ethnic studies curriculum was that they were afraid that the curriculum was making the kids mad and angry and frustrated, and that them learning their own history and learning the history of America and learning the history of colonization and learning the history of how we got to where we're at today was making the kids angry. But in addition to making the kids angry, it was empowering them. Young people were making strides to go to four-year universities, were getting involved in politics, were getting involved in the local city government. You know, when we are engaging in understanding of ourselves, right? And this is something that I've learned within my own story. You know, we become more aware of our surrounding, become more aware of the wrongs that are happening in society, and you want to do something about it. And so, to me, it's strategic that there is an effort to remove diversity, equity, and inclusion from the classroom, from the businesses, from our organizations, because when people are more aware about what is happening in society, when people are more, quote unquote, woke about what is happening across this nation, they are galvanized to take action, right? And when people take action, they change the systems of power. And that is what is happening. Folks are changing the systems of power, and people don't like that. There are key people who like to keep things as it is and want to see certain outcomes when it comes electorally, when it comes politically, when it comes socially. And I think that when we are targeting diversity, equity, inclusion, we are purposely trying to keep people within certain social classes. And so I think what is important in this time is to recognize how we are combating this. You know, something that we worked at on the NAACP was last summer, which was a very hot summer, was the gutting of affirmative action, right? And how affirmative action on a federal level was to support and give access to those who didn't have access to the ivory tower, to the four-year universities. And so part of what we had to do in that moment in time is challenge all of our states, challenge all of our universities to commit to diversity no matter what. So what does that mean? That means ensuring that there are key benchmarks and markers that you are doing within your university to ensure that young people of color have access to those spaces. That means ensuring that you are recruiting and employing teachers of color to be a part of those universities, to be role models to those young people. That means eliminating barriers to higher education, such as standardized testing. There are a plethora of standards that we can put in place to ensure that we are including diversity, equity, inclusion, but part of it takes a coordinated effort in recognizing what is happening right now.
We'll get to questions. We'll get to questions later. We're going to use the note card.
I got it. No, kids were, there's a way you can talk about it, because I like my kids angry. I like my kids frustrated, because we have to recognize what's really actually happening in society. I think they were using that as a ploy to remove that curriculum, which actually ended up getting removed from the state of Arizona during that period of time, because they were afraid about what was happening. But that was a way in which they were getting and galvanizing voters, particularly white women, around anti-CRT issues.
So if we could, we're going to hold off until we get to the questions. And if we on the panel could also hold off on responding. So we'll go from there.
To sort of piggyback off of that, I mean, I've taught for too many years to count. But one of the things that I basically tell all of my parents during back to school night is that if your kids walk away from learning American history and it makes them feel good about themselves or feels good about the history, I probably have not done a good job of teaching it. And that doesn't mean that you can't love America, but it does also mean that you should also have an open and critical eye to this. Yvonne mentioned the idea of like having a seat at the table, and that does make tons of sense. And in a lot of cases, like when we think about that table metaphorically for America, that table was not built by everybody. That table was built by one specific group of people. I mean, even when we get to like the historical context of it, and Thomas Jefferson says that all men are created equal, we've now tried to change the meaning of those 5 words. But in essence, when he wrote them to literally mean that all colonial men in America were equal to all colonial men in England, and that was it. Not women, not LGBTQ plus community members, not African Americans, not people that were enslaved, not indigenous folks. He was literally talking about white colonial men being equal to white Englishmen in England, and that was it. Us trying to now go back and try to change the meaning of that term shouldn't necessarily take away from the intention of the way that he wrote it. And when it comes to having a seat at that table, I think what a lot of people would like to hope for when it comes to DEI work is the idea that it's okay to kind of let that table go. And that in this sort of new beginning that we can build a table together with a bunch of other people's input on how to actually build that table and have it make sure that it is bigger, that it can actually support other people, and that it can actually last for like the test of time. And so having a historical framework for DEI is important because this country was not built using DEI as a framework for anything. Our Constitution has enslavement baked into it. Our Constitution does not include, the benefits and rights of women whatsoever. We've had to add on amendments on top of that. But when you have a group of men that were able to kind of sit down, in Philadelphia, 100, 250 years ago and come up with a document, it shouldn't be surprising that they wrote a document that benefited them because, they were the only people that they were getting information from. And so while I don't necessarily blame them for creating the document that they did, it's also up to us to be able to look at that document and look at the people and look at the time in which they wrote it and say, you know what, this should be changed because this country has changed and it has made steps. It probably has not made as many steps as it could and that it should. But we can do that if we decide that we can, envision a new future that in some ways kind of recognizes that past for what it was, but also thinks about the ideas of how we can reimagine and make a new future with all of us included in that process. And so I think that part is important. And when it comes to the sort of war idea on DEI, it comes from the fact that people would like to hold on and maintain power. And do I understand that basic logic? I do. It's scary to want to let go. It's scary to have to sacrifice something for the common good of other people. But that is what makes, the human condition what we are. And that's what should actually make us, better than other species of animals that are out there because we actually are sentient beings that have that ability to do so. And so when it comes to DEI, part of it is, what are we willing to sacrifice? And a part of it is also, what are we willing to do to create a better future for everybody and not just a certain group of people?
Picking up on your point, Leo, these are different times. I mean, Bob Dylan sang about this years ago, right? The times they are changing, and if you can't get on, then get out of the way, right? And so I think there's a misunderstanding of what DEIJ is, or it's also called Jedi, right, for you Star Wars folks, all right? So with that, we're talking about diversity of everybody, right? It's not just one group of people. We're talking about race, we're talking about gender, we're talking about religion, ability, social class, ways of thinking, all right? So we're talking about including everybody. So if you are not able to use the bathrooms because you're in a wheelchair, that's an equity and an inclusion issue. All right? We're talking about being able to have all of us having a seat at the table. And so we're looking at communities that governments often do not have representation by everybody. And my specialty is looking at young people of all types, and that young people are almost never represented on boards of directors or consulted to do product development. And so we're talking about making room for everybody, and we all benefit by one another. Right? So I think that you're right about we really do need to have a different paradigm. And people need to understand that DEI is not a dirty word. It's part of human rights, and it's that which bonds us together, not that separates us or makes one group more powerful than another, like my right is better than your right.
Hold on for a second. Have to bring in one of our new panel, I mean not new, but a panelist. And if you wouldn't mind just saying your name for us, and we'll include you in all of our discussion here.
My apologies, I'm coming all the way from South Denver, and the traffic, horrific, right?
Yes.
Oh my God. Well, my name, this does say Van Ross, but I'm actually Von Ross.
Okay.
And I am the co-creator of the Museum for Black Girls. I've been in education with Emily Griffith Technical College for over 20 years. I serve as vice president of the VET, and I also sit on the Common Course numbering system.
Good. Okay.
For Colorado.
In fact, is there something going on campus now around the museum's work?
Absolutely. So for those of you who do not know, CU has a museum on campus. It's a 5-minute walk from here. It's free to the public. I would highly suggest you go and visit it. It's beautiful, and yes, we do have an exhibit there.
Thank you. So, getting lots of great questions, and so for our roundtable, I want to just throw this one in because there seems to still be some questions about what's going on, especially when two of us are talking about the human rights. I think we all are talking about human rights. So the question here is, are we hindering the advancement of human rights by using labels such as DEI, JEDI, etc.? And I think we've already begun to respond to that. It's not about the separation. But if you just say just a few more words, and we'll bring you in, Vaughn.
Yes. So, you know, when they brought the idea of should we ban this, I was like, well, am I for it? Am I against it? Well, kind of both. Because yes, as you would say, we are all humans. And if we could learn to embrace the human race, I believe that we would be much better off. And putting labels on things, sometimes our perception of what that label is can be skewed in so many ways, right? And so because what separates us is what makes us unique. It's what makes life interesting, right? If you went into Walmart and you only had one candy bar to choose from, I'd have a fit. If I went into, Saks and I could only choose one pair of shoes, I would lose my mind. So, yeah, that diversity is what we need. We need it, right? It makes life so much more interesting when we're all included. And when you talk about including everyone, wherever, in my opinion, wherever inequality exists, whether it be in politics, social media, community, it's unfair, right? we all deserve the same opportunity. And I really do believe that we all need to jump on the human side of who we are, embrace that, because at the end of the day, that's what it's about. We're all humankind, right? And learning to be kind, learning to be tolerant of other cultures and other ways and understanding, I mean, that's the variety and the pizzazz of life. And so I think those labels do, they hinder us. I believe the intent was well-meaning, but unfortunately, I believe that it was not well executed.
Well, okay. Others of you, any kind of response to that? Let's keep this one brief because we have a lot more to get to.
I love your shoe analogy, and there's also the salad analogy, just FYI. So if you order a salad and they plunk down a quarter head of iceberg lettuce, yeah, that's salad. But if you have one that's got arugula and cucumbers and sprouts and avocado, it's much more interesting. And you don't have to like everything in it, but it makes it a more interesting experience.
Exactly.
Because we have quite a few questions here about whether or not the language of DEI is really the problem rather than helping people to understand better. You guys, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, I think, it's this question of do we operate in the world that we currently exist or the world that we want to see, right? And in the world that we exist in right now, there is, systematic oppression of people of color, with people with disabilities, women. Folks may argue it's a class issue, folks may argue it's a race issue, others may say it's a caste issue. There's so many ways in which you can look at this, but I think that as an organizer, right, I'm really big about naming the issue, naming the problem, making sure that we are able to create solutions for this. And so when we don't name DEI, particularly in the world that we exist in now, we oftentimes overlook the issues that are glaring us in the face, right? Mm-hmm. I was on a panel yesterday, and people pointed out that there were no women on the panel, right? It's a question of how panels were organized. There are things that we have to create when it comes to our values and our systems, and we're doing the work right now to overhaul that, because currently right now, we don't exist in that reality where we value the diversibility of our human connection, right? As we change the value of that, I think we can begin to understand and make that human connection. But until we name that there are not enough black people in the room, until we name that there are not enough women in the room, until we name that there's not access to those spaces, those issues will continue to happen over and over and over again. And more so, those communities will continue to suffer and be kept out of those spaces.
Yeah. I think that when it comes to, the different terms and labels that we want to give things, I don't really see an issue with it. I think when it comes to the ideas of, DEI, DEIJ, DEIJB, we also have the ability to, the reason why we have those terms is in order to make it more exact about what the human race is and what people actually need. We also have to understand that, again, looking at things historically, for a long time, there were only certain groups of people, on this continent, in this world, that people actually considered human. I mean, when we talk about the ideas of race and racism against folks, we also have to understand that, yes, we are all the same human race, but there are millions of people across this country that really believe that our skin color actually makes us different forms of humans. And so being able to break it down into these ideas of diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and belonging are sort of the different pillars that we should strive to meet and to think about in order to look at each other as more human. Because when we use that term human race, a lot of people look at that term, and if you were to close your eyes and think about it, we probably don't see in our mind, one of almost every sort of race that is out there. We probably tend to think of white folks as just being human. That is the default setting. And so when we are able to sort of use these terms to be more specific, it allows people an easier way to kind of get access into what we're trying to do and what the ultimate goal is, which is to be able to see every one of us in this room, every one of us in this country as being whole and not just sort of like blending into sort of, you know, what the mainstream is or what we think of as the norm is. And so, I mean, I think it's important that we continue to use these terms and that we continue to be as more specific as we possibly can, because I think it helps people learn, and I think it gives people sort of like these targeted steps that we can get to in order to look at the goal, which is to like look at us all as humans. And unfortunately, we still aren't there yet. I mean, we still have soccer players that, you know, when they mess up in a game, you know, you have people in the crowd that are giving them monkey signs and chanting monkey at them or calling them apes or gorillas. And, you know, that is as far from human as we can possibly get. And so I'm all for using as many terms and acronyms as we can in order to get people to understand, you know, what the goal is and how we can get there.
I have to interrupt one more time. Thank you, panel. I'm going to ask you to respond to what you think thus far of the questions that we're getting. But just to remind those of you who may have come in a little bit later, please write legibly. I'm trying to decipher what's here in order to raise your questions, and also make sure that you're to the point in raising your questions. There's some really great questions coming in and going from there. But now, back to the round table.
I have a visual that might be helpful. If you think about the issue of humans or human rights as an umbrella, all right, and there's spokes to the umbrella, and there's a spoke for race, there's a spoke for gender, there's a spoke for disability. There's all these different spokes. And so how do you teach people about it? Well, you can look at what's called human rights education or global education or peace education or socio-emotional learning. I mean, and DEI is one of those spokes, right? And so you often need to use different languages to let people know that you're talking about all of these things. But we're not talking about one particular one. We're talking about the overall framework. And so it's important to see that when we're talking about DEI, we're talking about a whole lot of different things, right? And certainly we can all find ourselves under that umbrella.
Yeah. I would also say, again, that idea of human, like we have used, like, throughout the world historically, when you want to go ahead and dehumanize a group of people, whether it's in Nazi Germany referring to Jewish people as rats or roaches, like the first thing that we do in order to try to take away a sense of belonging or a sense of humanity to people is by making sure that they are not human, and we decided we're going to go ahead and call them something different. And so again, like I think the terms that we use are important and that they're beneficial until we can actually get to the point where we can really consider and look at everybody as being, you know, all human and all together.
I think it's at a place where we have to legislate, right? There are attacks happening in all these communities. Most recently in West Virginia, a young girl in middle school since the beginning of the school year has been bullied by her white peers, calling her the N-word, writing things on her desk, bullying her. Since the start of the school year, she has lost 40 pounds because of the bullying. That is happening all across this country. And so for us to ensure that marginalized communities are protected, we have to legislate DEI. We have to make sure that people are protected because these institutions are not protecting us. They are not taking care of us. They don't know how to handle this. And so there's an actual consequence for people's behavior, for people's absent-mindedness, for people's neglect. These things will continue to happen.
All right. I'm going to move to some of the questions or prompts that I have here for us. I think we have a good sense that there's a need to understand why the terms are being used as they are. And I think our roundtable is beginning to try to address that. I'm sure that there are going to be others who have still more questions about such. And we may find a way in order to have discussions with people who would like to gather. I don't know, I'm not volunteering any of you. I'm just saying that might happen. I'm not able to stay around today, but I'll be more than happy to have such conversations with other folk, if you will. One of the bosses is in the back. I hope she's not going to be upset with my suggestion. Anyway, let's get now to why these attacks. Why is the workplace being attacked in terms of the piece that people want to do? What are your thoughts about the fact, especially after there was such a commitment from so many organizations after George Floyd's murder, that there was many workplaces were interested in finding ways of addressing the problem? But now we've seen, as one person is asking here, is it within the last year or two that we've seen a retraction from that? So first, the workplace.
Yeah, if I could speak to that, yes, definitely. So in 2019, when my niece and I began the Museum for Black Girls, it was a concept that we wanted to motivate, elevate, and educate people on the achievements, and because we felt like it hadn't been highlighted enough. And at that particular time, yes, everyone was eager to learn. Everyone was eager to help. And I believe that visual that we saw of George Floyd moved everyone that was human, who had a heart, who had a mind for justice, and said that if this was my son, if this was my brother, if this was my husband, how horrible was that? And so we became very sensitive. And yes, I do believe that and so there was this huge push. Oh, okay, let's look at all these injustices that are happening in our society, workplace and socially, everywhere. It was very, very, very intense, and the focus was there. And I do believe that it has declined since then. But it's just like you were saying, we have to keep putting this in the forefront and allowing people to see that these things that wasn't an isolated incident. It happens all the time. And so I think that will, but it has definitely declined. It has definitely declined.
Would you all keep the round table going while I try to decipher a lot of these wonderful questions from our audience here?
Yeah, I think that when it comes to a lot of what we saw in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd was sort of like the knee-jerk reaction to a lot of companies, falling into, social pressure, which pressure does work from society. Like, we should continue to do it. I mean, protesting is like literally in the First Amendment of the Constitution, and we should exercise that right whenever we need to, because it is a way of getting certain things done. But unfortunately, with a lot of things, I think that a lot of these corporations and institutions thought that would just sort of just be a quick fix. Like, hey, we can go out there, put out a statement. We can go out there and hire some Black and brown people, some women, LGBTQ plus people that might have, mental or physical, cognitive abilities, and that would just go ahead and fix it. And it wasn't until they began to understand and realize that, sure, like, it takes more than just bringing people into these spaces, but we actually have to learn how to integrate and actually how to use their expertise and how to use their experiences. And when we do that, that also means that we now have to go ahead and look at all of our practices and policies and procedures. And for a lot of these institutions, that was just a step that they were not really willing to go to. They didn't want to have to go back and really look at their hiring practices. They didn't want to have to go back and look at, the retention abilities. They didn't want to have to go in and look at the ways in which they support, other folks that are within their company and change the way that they did things. They thought just bringing them in would be good enough. And after a year or two, they've, unfortunately just kind of gotten sick and tired of it. And as humans, like, we do that all the time. It is the reason why that in every November, December, every single gym in America gives you one of those great rates for January 1st. Hey, January 1st, you can sign up for $10 a month or no money down. Go out there and get your New Year's body back. And sure, in January and February, tons of people go to the gym and go and hang out. And by the time we get to, St. Patrick's Day, the gym is back to the way that it is. And that's because people want to go to the gym and feel good about themselves and think that they're doing something, but we don't want to actually sustain it, because it's more than just getting to the gym and lifting some weights or hopping on that elliptical or that cardio, but it's also not having to go back home and learning how to eat right. And what steps are you going to take when you are not at the gym? And are you going to get enough sleep? And are you going to drink enough water? And when it comes to all those things, people, naturally begin to fall back into their own habits and into their own things that make them comfortable. And these institutions and these corporations are no different. And that was kind of goes back into the idea of what Wisdom was talking about when it comes to legislation. And that's part of the reason why legislation is important, because what it does is it holds these institutions and corporations accountable for their actions. And without, legislation, we probably would have made much of the progress that we've made so far. I mean, DEI as a practice has been started, back in the mid to late 60s. Now when we walk into a building, we see, ramps along with steps, and that is just a part of what we've grown up with now, but that doesn't happen without legislation.
Right. Historically, I was fascinated to find that DEI is really a very old thing, and that Andrew Carnegie started it back in the early 1900s at the steel mills in Pittsburgh because he felt that the workers, they needed education, their wives and their children, and they supported everybody going to school. And education was seen to be an equalizer for society. So George Floyd was a hot button moment. Andrew Carnegie was a hot button moment. The 1960s and the civil rights movement was a hot button moment. And so during the 60s, we had inclusive education when we were so excited to learn about one another and to find our bridges. But now we're seeing that DEI is often being banned, and seen as a dirty word, and books are being banned, and information is being limited, especially to young people. And I think this is a real concern. We're not teaching human rights education in that we are the same in any form, really nationally. So what we are seeing is that workers are going in and they're discriminating and they're creating policies that are biased. And so because of this, they were getting hit with lawsuits. The lawsuits mattered. It motivated the organizations to do something. But what happened, because schools aren't teaching this, they started contracting out with these DEI organizations to come in and do training. And they're all over the board with what they provide. And the costs are all over the board. And the data is not conclusive because they're collecting data in different kinds of ways, so that when people say, well, prove to me that DEI works, well, we could, but we aren't able to pull that kind of data up because of the methodologies and the strategies that the workplaces are being provided. So I think it's really important to look at George Floyd as one of those historical moments that gives us an opportunity to say, how are we going to do things better? Because we certainly have the knowledge and power and ability to do that.
Yeah, I think from a business perspective, I don't think they were just only sick and tired of it. I think it was no longer profitable because the way in which they approached D&I was it wasn't preventative, it was performative, right? The idea of we can place certain black TV shows or black movies, or we're gonna donate to organizations and give them pennies on the dime instead of actually really engaging in terms of what we can actually give to support these communities. I think in those moments in time, there was a collective consciousness because it wasn't just George Floyd. It was Ahmaud Arbery. It was Breonna Taylor. It was countless others that were happening throughout that summer where collectively we were having a consciousness of like, hey, we have to do something. In the midst of a global pandemic, people were outside protesting every single day, right? And so part of what we have to recognize is that enough wasn't being done, standards weren't being held, and it was just saying, hey, so that my store doesn't get vandalized, I'm going to put a Black Lives Matter flag in my store. I'm going to donate to this civil rights organization. I'm going to throw up the fist for Black History Month because I want people to see that I'm on that side. As our collective consciousness have started to disintegrate and we are kind of forgetting the things that happened in those moments in time, we are now seeing us come back to the true soul of America, right? We are now seeing some of the real feelings about diversity, equity, inclusion. Even though I'm not his biggest fan, the day that Trump got elected, Van Jones described it as a white lashing, right? The idea that having a black president for so long in the office caused the rise of Trump, this need to swing back to the quote unquote true soul of America. And so I think what we're going to continue seeing is this white lashing, these people who are wanting to come out and say how they really feel about diversity, equity, inclusion, how they really feel about wokeness. We've seen this in Florida, right? All across the state, the ban on diversity, the ban on African American studies or AP African American studies. All of these things are going to continue happening until we really address the core issue, until we really say, hey, let's address what our core values come to when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion. And so part of what's going to continue happening at the business table is that if we don't think about preventative practices when it comes to our hiring, when it comes to the way in which we deal with different employees, when it comes to the way in which we invest, right? Again, back to talking about profits, right? We have to really think about our values about profits over people, because right now that's where we're at. We believe more if it's profitable, we're leaning into that. If it's about people, we're leaning out of that. Okay.
We are now getting very short on time. And so we need to move through a few more of these. So what is it that's going on from the round table here about the way we seem to be going back towards a more patriarchal society, that women are losing their voices and rights in so many ways? I mean, what's going on with this? Why is that an attack area? Because we got to get to the point of what is it that people are going to be able to do to respond to these things. So I'm not going to be able to get to all of the other ones that I promised on the sheet here, but we need to sort of look at one more of these areas of why the attack on women and the strong push towards greater and greater patriarchy.
Well, I believe that is just, the fear of, when it comes to gender, I believe like it's the fear of women taking over, and women being too sensitive, and women being too, not having the ability to really look at the bottom line, as you would say, about, because that's what we're concerned about, profit over people. And women have a tendency to look at all the soft things, and men don't feel like that they have the ability to look at the harder things. What does make a business profitable? And I always say you really cannot make these decisions unless you've been the person that has walked a mile at least in those shoes. And unfortunately, I just think that fear that women taking over will just create this world that's not realistic, especially when it comes to business. But I do believe that as long as we continue to speak out, and as long as we continue to fight for rights of everyone, that we will achieve these, no matter what the thoughts are in terms of what a woman can do versus what a man can do.
I think the attack on women is horrific. It is oppressive that we're talking about health care, we're talking about reproductive rights, we're talking about economic equity, we're talking about who takes care of the children in the home, we're talking about power dynamics in government, we're talking about a whole series of things, and that women are objectified as young people are objectified, as we're talking about black people as if they are objects, like homeless people as if they are objects. We are moving into an objectification that allows autocracy to take over, and I think that we have to speak out in great form against these kinds of oppression. And I think that rights education and instructing young people to be critical thinkers is absolutely important. And so denying them access to information, we don't have to like everything we read, but we have to think about what we're reading, and we have to make some decisions, and we need to have technological, literacy to know where to go to find good information. So I think that there's an full-sail attack on women, and not just women, but a whole lot of other people, and this whole DEI is embracing that.
We have 18 minutes, and we have to get to what are we going to do to respond? What's being done to respond? And so the question that I've formed for us here, y'all, I'm not trying to not respond to your questions, but we wanted to get to what this panel was dedicated to. So in the communities that you are associated with, what are some actions that are being talked about for legal action or community action?
Yeah, as we know, there are many lawsuits that are in place right now just around all the attacks on a DEI, because we have to be able to fight in the courtroom. But what I'm more concerned about right now, personally, is some of the grassroots efforts that are happening, right? After the book bans, have been established young people have really been working to establish freedom libraries. They've been really working to make sure that folks have access to education. I think the way we started this panel was understanding how education is supposed to be the great equalizer. Now the responsibility is in the hands of the people. The responsibility is in the hands of institutions that care about people to ensure that they have access to those spaces. And so young people across this nation are establishing banned book libraries or establishing freedom libraries. In addition to that, I think young people are working to ensure, particularly at the university level, that universities are committed to diversity no matter what by establishing recruitment and retention programs. When I was a student at UC Santa Cruz, we talked about diversity, equity, inclusion all the time. The university would, put my picture on the website and say, we got black students here. But the students had to do the work to ensure that other black students came to that university or they would not, right? We literally had to recruit students from Los Angeles, from San Francisco, from Modesto, from all these different parts of the state of California to recognize Santa Cruz as a place that they could come, have a community, and thrive. But more important than that, back when I was in college, I was really big about the matriculation. Oftentimes we have opportunities where young black people are getting accepted to these universities, but are not being retained in these spaces. And so what is the university doing to invest in these young people to not only get into those universities, but to also graduate? If that's either financially, if that's through mentorship, if that's through education or access to the different classrooms or spaces, it's important for young people to have black student housing. It's important for young people to have resource centers. It's important for young people to have places or spaces where they can connect with other black students and decompress, particularly at these predominantly white institutions. And I think what's happening right now, particularly with this gutting of affirmative action, is folks are like, well, that means it's gonna be a good thing for HBCUs. That's gonna increase enrollment. That's not the point of the HBCUs. HBCUs are there to support and retain black students, but if we're not funding these institutions and supporting them at that financial level, then we are exhausting the system. You can hear countless and countless and countless stories from HBCUs where students aren't getting their financial aid, when students are living in dormitories that are not up to a standard of living, right? We have to make sure that we are addressing this problem holistically and not putting this weight on institutions that have been serving our students for countless years.
I want to get everybody in on this part about what's going on.
I think that when it comes to wisdom, like one of the great things that he said was that idea of investment. You are what you repeatedly invest in, and that's something that I talk to students about, the school in which I work at, when I go and do consulting work. What are the things that you consistently invest in? I think, unfortunately, when it comes to DEI and some of these other things, like we think of DEI as like a feeling. You have to feel good in order to do it, and you don't. It's a discipline. And we tend to not look at DEI professionals as actual professionals and scholars, in which they are. We don't necessarily go ahead and argue with our lawyer, and we don't necessarily argue with our doctor. We take their expertise off of what they've learned in the education that they've attained and the experience that they have, and we take their word at it because we believe that they are good, because they have, that plaque on the wall. They have that experience. When you walk in the room, you see them. And when it comes to a lot of DEI professionals, we don't normally give them that sort of respect and that sort of courtesy. We think that it is something that can just be kind of argued and debated, and it can't. Like, it is a field of study. It is an academic field in which people have spent their lives dedicated towards, and we don't give them the same sort of respect that we give other professionals. I think another part of it is, when it comes to DEI, creating, goals and metrics. Like, what are the goals that we want when we have DEI and we want to implement it into an institution or into a system? Where do we want to ultimately see things go? And I think oftentimes when institutions go ahead and bring it in, it's just sort of, spur of the moment. We're just going to kind of go by the seat of our pants, and we're going to kind of build a plane while we fly it. And that's a recipe for disaster. And because people don't sit down and dedicate enough time to actually, fleshing it out and trying to see exactly where they want to go and how they want to get there, you never get there. You just end up kind of spinning your wheels. And I think the other part that goes along into it is making sure that you invest money into it, that you have adequate training, that you also try to find ways to budget for it as well. Because if you don't, it's going to begin to peter out, and you kind of get what you're seeing today.
We can't have that. Well, we definitely can't have it petering out. And what I would say, you said, what are we doing? And what I would suggest is, first of all, let me thank each and every one of you for being here and sitting in this seats to listen to this, because I feel like it took courage to do so. And I just want to thank you because this is an issue that must be addressed and that we must face. And a lot of people say, well, what can I do? You know, that's a big thing. I'm not working at a university. Do what you can do within your arm's reach. Whatever it is that you are doing in your community, set up conversations, because it's educating people on diversity, equity, and inclusion is a lot of people just don't get it. I don't understand. Why is it necessary? Is it something we really need to do? What is it really about? Well, yes, it is necessary, and this is why. So do what you can within your arm's reach. If you have a community where you're active in your church, in your rec center, wherever you are, where you gather people, start to bring up conversations. Do what you can within your reach. And as we all do a little bit, you know, there's many hands make little work. That's an old African proverb. So many hands make little work. If we all do what we can to educate and to make people understand the necessity, when you get it, teach someone else. Show someone else why this is important. As an instructor for over 20 years, you know, they said 62% of the population believes that diversity, equity, and inclusion does not work. Well, being someone who has lived in it, being someone who has benefited from it, I can tell you that it does. And I believe that the more that we understand and the more that we educate one another on what it means to be inclusive. How do I include everyone when I'm so used to what I've been taught? I've been taught and shown all these bias. How do I get past that? Well, let me help you. Let me show you. Sit down with someone who does not eat what you eat. Sit down with someone who does not look like what you look like. And when you find the tremendous beauty and value in that, you will understand the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It becomes more relevant, but you have to do that, and you have to look for those opportunities. And I believe as we retrain our mind, we reshape our heart, because that's a huge problem.
No, I didn't mean to cut you off, because we have one more person, and
Yeah.
the time is just ticking
Go right
away.
ahead. Go ahead.
I have 5 recommendations. Okay, one is on education. And this means in schools, it means looking at what we look at for news and our media and where we get our information. We need to go to credible sources for our information. Mm-hmm. Second is money, economic equity. We're talking about poverty being a real problem in every way. So we want to create more equitable financial situations and create jobs and opportunity. Poverty is a bad thing for equity. Okay, we're talking about voting. Get out there and vote. And often we have taxation without representation for young people. Maybe consider decreasing the voting age. Okay, we're talking about government representation. We need to have people who are diverse in giving feedback to local governments, to state governments, and national governments. But from the ground up is a good place to start to become civically engaged. And the last is to look at DEI as a public health issue, because it makes people die, it kills people, it empowers people, it makes us smart, it gives us everything from all parameters. So thinking about it as a public health issue, I think will help as well. Thank you.
So, fellow roundtable colleagues, thank you very much for a really exciting, I wish we had had a round table so that we could have looked at each other rather than out to the audience and so forth. I really do think that this last part is critically important about how do we begin to have more coalition building efforts, that it's not just about some people, but the way in which people can come to understand how they can go about responding to this, as one audience member asked, how can we do this in a way that it's not going to continue to seem to some people to be divisive, that we can make the coalition really about? I had to look up the phrase to make sure that I was remembering it correctly. I don't know if everybody remembers the preamble to the Constitution that speaks to we the people in order to form a more perfect union. In order to form a more perfect union. And I think that's what we are trying to do, is pay attention. As several of the teachers on the panel have said, we are paying attention that it didn't start this way, but that's where we are currently. We're paying attention to not what we want the world to be, but where we are currently in order to get to that, and so forth. So this has been, I think, exactly what CWA was interested in. A lot of different ideas, as the big motto says, big ideas and endless discoveries. Endless discoveries. And we trust that this particular round table on a flat surface has really addressed what we set out to do as the program committee of bringing this question to the CWA. Apparently I have 5 minutes. 4 minutes left. So quickly, any last words you all might want to share? Oh, no.
I mean, I wanted to get to more questions, but.
I know. I tell you, my friend, a lot of the questions had to do with how is it that we can begin to not deal with the language issues, but really get to the way in which to achieve the human rights aspect that was spoken about. But that was also eloquently responded to about we need to know what it is about human rights that are not being paid attention to.
DEI is good work. It is imperative. It is important. It's probably some of the most important work that we can embark on throughout the rest of our lives. It will undoubtedly make you better as individuals, and it'll make our society better as a whole. And it is probably the thing that is going to help save this planet. I think that when it comes to it, I think a lot of people, sort of are hesitant with a lot of things that you're not necessarily familiar with, because you don't exactly know what that first step is. And I don't know if people always do a great job of expressing that. And we can come up with as many great things that we can say to you all, but when you walk out of here today, what is the next step that you're gonna take? And I would say, reach out to your community, go into, businesses that are, multicultural, that benefit other folks, and, sit in there and have a cup of coffee, go grab some dinner to support that local business. I think that's a great way to start. Whether you take a couple bucks and you donate it to your local nonprofit, or whether it is you donating clothes, to a shelter that helps and supports, women and children. Those are ways that you all can kind of start on a really basic level, with things that are not necessarily going to make you change, like your radical lifestyle. All of us don't have $100,000 to donate to some local charity, but we can do things that are really small and pretty basic in order to just start to get the ball rolling. And I think that those are ways that you can jump out there and begin to impact your life and impact the lives of others. And as you get involved in some of these organizations, or you show up at that restaurant, or you go to that business, you're going to begin to meet other people that don't necessarily look like you. And even if they do look like you, they might have a different train of thought. And that's where conversations and coalition and building can happen.
We have 2 minutes.
I think that everyone in this room has been discriminated against, had their hearts broken, felt marginalized and sad and angry, and wanting to have a voice and not knowing how to speak that forward. Your hurt is real, my hurt is real. Everyone has this pain, right? So instead of focusing on my pain's bigger and better than your pain, let's find a way to be able to be compassionate and respectful to one another.
Yeah. I think we have to, in this period of time, there's this narrative that DEI must die. I think we have to change that from DEI must die to what Leo said, DEI saves lives. And for DEI to save the lives, to save the soul of America, it doesn't just require allyship, but it requires deep solidarity. What are you willing to put on the line? What are you willing to lose to ensure that we are building a more equitable world? Because for us to build the reality or the world that we want to live in, some of us have to make sacrifices, and some of us have to recognize how we are standing in the gap for others who are not able to be present.
Absolutely. And do what you can. If you feel like you can't physically do something yourself, then find someone who is on the move, who's doing things to help see that this continues, and help them. If you see someone, if you can say, well, I just can't do that, I can't do that. Oh, but look at her, look at him, look at what she's doing. Contribute financially, emotionally. Get in there and say, well, I can stack some books. You have all these books on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I can stack the books at an event you're having. Whatever, put your hands to making sure that this still happens. We are better together than we are apart.
Thank you, panel, once again, and to all of you sitting in the audience. There is another session this afternoon at 3 o'clock that, if you're so inclined, that should be just as exciting. So we encourage you to pay attention to that. And if there's anything else that we can do to assist with really bringing us together, as the panelists have said, we'd like to know your thoughts. Thank you very much. Have a great day.